Dr. Ford came across very firmly as someone who clearly believes she remembers a significant traumatic incident of sexual assault. Judge Kavanaugh, on the other hand, was very fiery in denying it ever occurred. He doesn't deny that Dr. Blasey Ford was sexually assaulted. He's just very clear that it wasn't Judge Kavanaugh who did it. And ultimately, it's the senators who are going to have to evaluate this, not in a legal sense, but in a political sense, in determining whether Judge Kavanaugh deserves to become Justice Kavanaugh.
Okay, so for this hearing, there is a special counsel that has been brought in. How effective do you think Rachel Mitchell has been serving as an outside counsel for the Republican-led committee?
I think Ms. Miller is an effective questioner. The problem was with the format. It was very disjointed. The idea of having her question for 5 minutes and then going over to the Democrats to talk in a very different way to Dr. Blasey Ford didn't really work, because the prosecutor couldn't develop a narrative and couldn't follow up in a seamless kind of way that you want to do when you have a witness on the stand. And ultimately, frankly, some of the areas of inquiry didn't quite work. She didn't gain traction because she tried to say, for example, that it was a political hit job that she was being paid, that Dr. Blasey Ford was being paid to make some of these allegations, or was being funded. None of that came out. Ultimately, the inconsistencies that Ms. Miller showed ended up being fairly minor. But again, ultimately, it's going to be for the senators to determine how effective the information she was able to elicit was in determining whether Judge Kavanaugh deserves to be Justice Kavanaugh.
So this is not the first time a Supreme Court nominee has been accused of sexual misconduct. Can you talk to me about today's hearing and how it might differ from the 1991 testimony of Anita Hill? And 27 years later, what are the similarities?
Well, a couple of things. We're in a different moment right now. We're in the Me Too moment. When Anita Hill testified, sexual harassment had only recently been recognized as illegal under federal civil rights law. But the other fundamental thing is that Anita Hill was claiming sexual issues, as it were, in the workplace. This involved sexual misconduct when the nominee was a teenager. And so those two things are quite different. You're also talking about conduct, if Dr. Blasey Ford is to be believed, that is a crime. Justice Thomas was never accused of criminal misconduct. Some of the things that Anita Hill said that he had said were troubling, but they did not rise to the level of sexual assault, and that makes a difference. Clearly, the testimony, if Dr. Blasey Ford is to be believed, with respect to Judge Kavanaugh, is going to be more troubling in the broader scheme of things, even though it happened almost 4 decades ago, than the kinds of comments that Anita Hill attributed to now Justice Clarence Thomas.
So that brings me to what could potentially be the impact of Dr. Ford's testimony on this confirmation process?
The impact of Dr. Blasey Ford's testimony is going to depend on the context in which it is placed by Judge Kavanaugh's testimony. Understand, ultimately, when you are evaluating credibility, you are evaluating the credibility of 2 competing stories. So whether Dr. Blasey Ford's testimony has any kind of durable impact on either the vote or on history will depend ultimately on whether Judge Kavanaugh's denials are believed by the senators who ultimately were going to have to make the decision as to whether he deserves this promotion to the Supreme Court of the United States.
San Diego attorney and legal analyst Dan Eaton, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much, Ebony.